This video is sponsored by Capture One. Capture One has a variety of tools that you can utilize to help your workflow be much faster. In this video, I'm gonna break down how to use style brushes, the color editor, and masks to help improve your portrait workflow. Let's go ahead and break this down and let's cover todo el pedo. In this first image, I'm gonna be highlighting the style brushes, color, and masks in Capture One. So to start, I already have a preset layer softbox removal. I did get the softbox in the frame and I did use the healing brush. Now I'll cover that at the very end of this specific image. But what I want to highlight is the utilization of the style brushes. Now that was included in the Capture One 21 update and it makes a big impact in my workflow. So this was the old way of creating layers in Capture One. So let's say that I shoot high speed sync, right? And I already know that the areas back here are gonna be dark and I wanna bring back the detail. So this was the old way of doing it. So I would go over here, hit the drop down arrow, go to filled adjustment layer. I would say, okay, well, I wanna bring up the blacks. I wanna bring back that detail. And I also wanna bring up the shadows, right? But it brings it up on the entire image, which makes it a global adjustment. So what I would need to do is right click. I would put invert mask, which basically means that effect is not showing up everywhere. And then of course I would get the brush tool. So I'd push B on the keyboard and then I would have to set up my opacity and then my flow. And then I would come in here and I would start brushing. And then I would start coming over here, bringing back that detail, the detail over here, and the detail over there, right? And so essentially there's nothing wrong with doing it in that way. It's just that, well, now that basically means I just did 4 steps, right? And I haven't even named my layer. I'd have to come over here, name it HSS blacks. And so that was a lot of steps, right? Having to make the layer inverted, get the brush tool, yada, 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 right? So I'm gonna go ahead and delete this layer. Let me show you the way that I like working now. And it's utilizing these style brushes. Once again, this was an update that was added back in Capture One 21. I'm using Capture One 22. And so if I come over here, I've already made a brush with those settings, knowing that majority of my work, I love to bring back the blacks and the detail because I'm shooting very contrasty. If I go to HSS blacks, you'll see that I get a check mark. And what this style brush means is that I get to brush this in locally now. So instead of having to go through all of those steps, now I can simply just click this little brush that I've already made myself, move my cursor in, push the left bracket, and now I can brush in all of that detail. And what's great is if I go over here to the right, you'll see that the layer's already been made for me. If I right click, I already have the presets that I already like using. And so now I can simply just brush in all of these little areas and it helps my workflow be a little bit more efficient opposed to, like I said, doing 4 steps, right? And what's great about this layer is that it's its own layer. I can adjust the opacity if I want to. I can come back over here and say, you know what, maybe the blacks is raised up too much for this specific image, or maybe even my shadows, I can bring that down, okay? Now, because this is the local adjustment, now that I'm in Capture One, if I push M on the keyboard, that reveals the mask. And what you see in red is what's been brushed in. So you'll see that I got the arm over here. So all I need to do is just push E on the keyboard and make my brush smaller by pushing the left bracket. And I'm simply just going to erase and just remove it from some of the areas that it shouldn't be. But I'm only bringing up the shadows and the black, so it shouldn't affect it too much. I'm gonna push M on the keyboard to take the display mask off. And so I've already brought back the detail relatively quick. Now, if I go back to style brushes, I also have made my own version of a dodge brush, something that I would use in Photoshop, but I can also utilize it in Capture One. And the reason why I love this is that I love using off-camera flash, right? Bringing in this flash that comes in to sculpt the light on my subject. But sometimes, gotta be honest, the light isn't as bright as I would maybe want. So I'm gonna brighten up the face myself. So I have a preset brush called Dodge Eli. And what's gonna happen is that I like these brush settings of 100% opacity and 4% flow. And I want the exposure, the brightness levels to go up gradually, right? Because the flow at 4% is just gonna give it a gradual increase. So I'm gonna go to dodge. You'll see it's check mark. Once again, nothing happens. You'll see that the brush tool is automatically selected already. And now all I need to do is simply just brush on the face to just brighten it up just a little bit more, okay? And if I right click, look what happens. Automatically 100% flow or opacity, 4% flow. And if I push M on the keyboard, what you'll see is the face now is in red, which showcased that's where that brightness of the exposure is, right? So I hope you're seeing some of the benefits of these style brushes. Now, if I want to, in the style brush panel, you'll see it says built-in style brushes. So Capture One does have some presets for you that you can kind of play around with. One of the ones that I like using is enhancements. And here you'll see it says Iris Enhance, which is for the eye. So I'm going to push Z on the keyboard to get the zoom tool. I'm going to zoom all the way in. And what I'm going to do is, let's use some of the presets. I'm going to go here to Iris Enhance. I get the little cute little check mark. And now I can brush over the eye, and you'll see that some of the detail that I brought back. So one of the most important things when you're using these brushes is to push M on the keyboard to see exactly where you're brushing, right? To kind of see if you need to make any refinements. Now, if I hit the check mark right here, you'll see the before and after. This is what the Iris Enhance created. You also see that there's a deep sky. If I go to the color, they have some saturation adjustments, and then they have some light and contrast presets that you can play around with. So the whole goal here is I want you guys to think about your workflow and your style of shooting. How do you guys approach your shoots? And what do you guys notice that you're always having to make layers for and then make adjustments and do that process over and over and over? So for example, I like in my images, so let's go ahead and make a style brush together right here, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a new layer, okay? And I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna go new empty layer, okay? Now, one of the things that I always do in all my images is my color grading, right? And I typically go for the same color grade, right? So I'm gonna scroll down and I'm just gonna show you how to make a style brush real quickly. I usually like to go in my shadows. I like to give them a little bit more of like a deep blue purple. So I'm gonna go a little bit this way, okay? And then I'm gonna go into my midtones and I'm gonna go and I'm gonna maybe make it, let's say, a little bit on the red side. And then on the highlights, I go a little bit on the orange side, right? And so I already have the colors that I like to set up, right? And so if I hit B on the keyboard, I want to set up my brush, right? So I want the size to be about right here. I'm going to right click. I'll probably have my flow. Let's maybe get my flow like at 25. And check mark right here for auto mask, brush with layer, erase with brush. That's totally fine. And so now what I want to do is I can now come up to the style brushes. I'm going to double click these or click these little dots here. And right here it says save style brush. And it's going to ask me, so what do you want for the style brush? Well, I want it to include the color balance adjustment that I made there. And then I want you to record the size of the brush, the flow that I already preset, and then the eraser. If I decide to erase, keep those same settings. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And then I can put here color grade. All right. And so now when I get the color grade, when I hit the check mark, I can come in here and I simply can brush in that color grade wherever I want if I need to. And maybe I don't want it in specific areas, of course, then I can erase it from specific areas. But the overall idea is to think about, and you can see already nicely, I'm already getting that cool little color grade, but figure out how you guys can utilize these style brushes, okay? So let's continue with this edit here, right? So I've already kind of highlighted the style brushes, and now what I want to focus on is masks, right? So on this image, when I captured this image, I really loved the colors in the background, but when I took the picture, they kind of looked a little bit faint. It wasn't as powerful as I wanted. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to make a new filled adjustment layer. New filled adjustment means this is a global adjustment. It's going to be on the entire image. So I'm going to go new filled adjustment, and I'm going to bring up the saturation to about 20. Let's go 2018. That's totally fine. But this time I'm going to utilize the the Kelvin slider because I notice it's a little bit too warm. So I'm going to bring it back to about 5305. So let's go if I can get 5305 around 53. You know what? Let me go ahead and just type it in. 5305 is the number that I originally used. So if I hit this check mark, you'll see the before and then the after. Now, if I zoom in, you're going to see the color just gradually. It's a very subtle effect. Let me zoom in even more because I know some people might be using their phones. So if I look, this is the before. And then the after, you'll see a subtle gradual color change there, which looks really nice, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this color 1, right? I basically want to make a duplicate of what I just did, but this time, instead of it being a global adjustment, I want to just bring back the detail in that beautiful sky back there. So what I want to do now this time, we just did a global adjustment, which brought the colors to the overall image everywhere. Now I'm going to come back to the plus with this drop down arrow and I'm going to go new empty layer, which means this is now a local adjustment where now I'm going to brush specifically where I want. But before I do that, I'm going to set up my settings. I'm going to go 5305 and then I'm going to bring up my saturation up to about 40. Okay. Now this time though, I am going to get the brush tool and I'm going to brush specifically just on the background. Now, sometimes it's hard to kind of see where you're brushing, so just push M on the keyboard, okay, and make sure your brush settings are where they need to be. I had 8% flow, which is not going to be enough to see anything. There we go. And so I'm simply just going to brush this in relatively quick. I think you guys are getting the overall idea here. And so because I love dramatic colors in my images, I love bringing out the colors, and one of the ways to do that is to do it locally, okay? Now, if you start seeing this kind of part of the face break apart, is because I have the auto mask feature, which kind of detects the edges and tries to do its best to kind of make sure that it finds similar colors and brightness. I'm going to take that off and I'm just going to get the eraser and just simply erase it. And there we go. Okay. And we get a nice fade. Let me get that off of the hand. And let me go ahead and push M on the keyboard again to take that off. And I'm going to name this color and then 2. Okay. So now if I push Y on the keyboard, this is the before and then this is the after. Now, if we go ahead and once again, we zoom in, you'll see, and I really want to focus on the color back here. This was the before and then the after. And if we put the slider, let me go to slider view right here, split, you'll see the difference between the color on the skin. It's a very subtle effect, right? We get a little bit of those oranges. You'll see the color difference between this and this. And all of this detail was being able to be brought back because of the style brushes that we used, and then using masks to locally brush in some of the areas to bring that color back. On this next image, I'm going to be focused on the magic eraser and the color editor. I already do have some preset layers. You'll see here I have the Dodge Eli, and if you remember in the previous video, you'll know that I love to use a style brush and use the Dodge Eli, which basically means I like to increase the exposure on the face to make it pop just a little bit more. So if I zoom in here and I hit the check mark, this is the before and then the after, adding that little bit of pop to the face. Then I added my base layer, which was a global adjustment. So if I push M on the keyboard, you'll see that all the adjustments are happening to the entire image. And as I scroll down, you'll see that I added a little bit of clarity and structure to this image. More importantly, though, I'm focused on my levels adjustment. I'm looking at the histogram and I'm noticing I'm missing some highlights and some whites. So I decided to move the slider to bring in a little bit more exposure. So if I drag this back by default, it was at 255, looked at my histogram, and then I dragged it to about 236 to get my exposure the way I want it. So if I hit the check mark, this is the before and this is the after. Now let's focus on that sky. The sky right now is this ugly, muddy blue. And the reason that's happening is that the white balance is making it more in the warm tones, but I want it more in the cooler tones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the sky with the magic eraser and be able to increase the saturation and change the Kelvin. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to scroll all the way up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the plus and I'm going to go to new filled adjustment layer. So instead of brushing this mask in, which is going to take some time, I made a new filled adjustment layer. And now what I'm going to do is with the magic eraser, this is going to select those blues, or essentially it's going to erase it. So let me show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to make a selection here. I'm just going to go here, make a selection. And what it's going to do is that it's going to select that same color tone, which is those blues, right? So it's already eliminated that, but we actually want to select it. So I push M again. What's selected is the opposite. So what I need to do is come back to this layer. I'm going to go and right click and put invert mask. So what you'll see now is what's in red is that blue I just selected. Now it did get a little bit of the hat. So I'm going to make sure I get my normal erase mask. And I'm going to go ahead and just erase it from this little section. And I'm going to make sure that the flow is at 100%. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this. And I also have a little bit of a hard edge here. So I'm going to increase my eraser. And I'm just going to fade that off. So I'm going to lower my flow so it can be a gradual process. And I'm going to just gradually fade that off. And then fade that off here. And so now I've made my selection. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this to Blue Sky. And what I mentioned was I want to decrease the Kelvin in about 49 Kelvin. So I'm going to go about 4932, and I'm going to increase the saturation to about 20. So if I hit the before and after, right away, you'll see that I've made the blues more richer opposed to those muddy blues that I had before. So big improvement on that blue sky. Now, I have the beautiful blues in the dress and the hat, and I fixed the sky back there because I want this beautiful color grade, but I want to improve it some more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back, hit the drop down arrow. We're going to go to new filled adjustment layer, and I'm going to name this layer color editor. And when I scroll down, the first color that I'm going to target under the advanced section is going to be that blue sky. So when I hit this color picker, I'm going to go ahead and make that selection. And now what I can do is I can target. So now I can get a better selection of that blue because we've already color corrected it with this layer. And so now I'm going to go to the hue and I'm going to decrease it to about -74 or 7.4. And then I'm going to also increase the saturation to about 14, 15, give or take. Let's go about 15.3. And then the lightness, I'm going to make that brighter. So I'm going to go about 32. All right. So if I push M on the keyboard, or not M, I should say, if I go to view selected color range, you'll be able to see that these are the specific blues that I'm targeting as I'm making these adjustments. So I'm going to go ahead and check this mark, check that off. And I'm going to double click or hit this check mark to show you the before and then the after. And what's great about the color editor, if I'm not mistaken, I think you can have up to 30 different color swatches that I can sample from, opposed to just being restricted to the basic section that I have here. So I'm going to go back, and the next color that I want to target is the skin. So I'm going to go ahead and move my cursor, and I'm going to get a little bit of the darker tones here, and it adds another color swatch. Now that I have that selected, I can adjust these. And what I want to focus on is I want to actually decrease the saturation just a little bit, but I want to lift up the lightness and make it brighter and go about 6.5. So if I check mark it before and then the after. Now, one of the problems is when I hit that check mark, you'll notice it's also affecting the yellows back here from the sunflower. So let's go ahead and look at the view selected color range. When I check mark that, you'll see that the yellows are still selected here. So what I need to do is I need to come to my color wheel, and I'm going to go ahead and bring this down and really restrict the yellows that I'm getting here. So I'm going to bring this down even more. And you'll see that you have a little bit of a fade here within this little section. And that's our smoothness. So what I need to do is I need to decrease it so that it doesn't grab some of those yellows. And so now I know for sure I'm just targeting the brown tones in the skin. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off. And now I'm going to add another color swatch. And I'm going to go into the dark greens. So I'm going to make those a little bit, the color, just a subtle difference. We're going to go about 2.6. We're going to bring up the saturation of those greens. So I can go really crazy here, right? But this is obviously way too much. So I'm going to go about, let's go about 8 or 9.8 is fine. And then the lightness, I'm going to make it just a little bit darker. Now I want to double check to see what I'm selecting. So I'm going to go to view selected color range. You'll see that I do have a little bit of the skin tone and a little bit of the yellow. So I obviously don't want that. So I'm going to move this color wheel section, this little pie section here, and I'm going to move this up. Okay. And then I'm also going to change the smoothness. So I can try to get rid of the yellows in the background right about there. Okay. So the last one that I'm going to do is I'm going to target those yellows. I want them to be nice and vibrant. They're a little bit faded right now. So I'm going to make a selection of the yellows. I'm going to double check my selection. I'm getting a little bit of the skin tone. So obviously I'm going to come over here and I'm going to refine it. And that's why I love Capture One. It allows you to really refine the color you're selecting. And I'm going to decrease it. So I just decreased the skin tone. And now I'm going to decrease the greens from the sunflowers. And so now I just have the yellow selected. And I'm actually going to bring down a little bit of the smoothness. And what I want to do is I want to make them brighter. I feel like they're a little bit too dark. So I'm going to brighten them up just a little bit. So let's go about 11.6 is fine for me. So let's take a look at the overall, just the color editor. So this is the before, the color editor, and this is the after. And last but not least, let's just see as an overall edit here. So before and then the after. And the big takeaway here is definitely getting those blues color corrected just right. Because look at this before, that ugly, muddy blue. It's just gross. I was able to bring out those yellows and really refine those and get those greens popping. And I think it's very crucial, guys, that you all are getting the full potential of your raw files. When you're processing them, get the full potential of your raw file before you take it into your final photo editor to make even further refinements. Let me know in the comment section below, what was your favorite feature that I utilized in this video? And if you guys are new to Capture One and you're thinking about trying it out or purchasing Capture One, make sure to use my discount code. I'm going to have a link. I'm going to have it pinned in the description. I have a code for 20% off a new annual subscription and new licenses for Capture One 22. So if you guys have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. I would love to help you guys out. You guys have a beautiful day, and I will see you guys on the next one.